Joining me now is Scott Lauber of the Philadelphia Inquirer to talk about a major spending spree in the Phillies offseason and everything that 2023 potentially holds. Hey, Scott, how are you?
Good, Carolyn. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So you recently wrote a piece digging into Phillies ownership. You had a lot of time with those guys, particularly with John Middleton. Tell me what the major takeaway was from that conversation.
So I've known John Middleton for several years now, and when I got here for spring training, I wanted to sit down and talk to him because there was something that was kind of going through my mind all winter long, and that was that, the Phillies had a club record payroll last year. They came within 2 wins of winning the World Series, and they returned the bulk of that same team in a division where they're competing against the Mets and the Braves, both of whom won 100 games last year. So my question was, what makes an owner of a team like the Phillies decide to then go out and spend $300 million to get Trey Turner? A lot of owners in the game would probably say, we're in a pretty good spot, and we'll come back and take our chances with this team that we have that got as far as it did last year. And it really led to a lot of, I thought, kind of telling responses from him in our conversation, just about kind of what his vision is for owning this team and how he views his position as, sort of the person in charge of how they spend their money. And he said, look, we were going to sign Trey Turner, or try to at least, regardless of whether we won the World Series, lost the World Series, turned our season around last June, didn't turn it around last June, because he wants to be great, and he wants to be great for a while, and he needs Trey Turner to do that. And I thought it was really, as I said, really kind of telling about where this particular owner wants to go and what he wants to do and what he wants to build here. And, we hear a lot in Philadelphia about Steve Cohen with the Mets and what he's done there. And I think John Middleton feels like, hey, look, we're putting our best foot forward here too, and we're going to try to win as many World Series in the next however many years as we can.
Yeah, it's fascinating insight, Scott, into just the minds of owners and how important legacy is and what they ultimately want to accomplish. It's worth the read for sure. I live in New York, and so all anybody can talk about is Steve Cohen going out and spending hundreds of millions of dollars this winter as well. When you think about Trey Turner, and it's one of the more interesting things I think that you said that came out of that conversation is that they were going to try to go for him whether they won a World Series or came up 2 games short. When you think about what Turner adds, where is his value, and do you expect him to fully meet the hype?
Yeah, one other word on John Middleton. You used the word legacy, and he used that word himself. He said, look, this is going to be my at least public legacy, is what happens with the Phillies. And, he said, look, I'm a little embarrassed to say this, but, 100 years from now, when people talk about the greatest teams in baseball history, I want them to talk about this vintage Phillies, this era of the Phillies, along with the 27 Yankees and, the Big Red Machine. And it's an ambitious goal. It's a lofty goal. It's one that is incredibly hard to reach. And he knows what it sounds like when he says that, but he also wants to set that goal high, wants to set that bar high. And even if they don't clear it, like if they set that goal for themselves and wind up winning a World Series or a couple of World Series, that's certainly going to be something that people look back on and say that he helped make that happen. To answer your question about Trey Turner, when they signed him, or when they were talking about signing him, Dave Dombrowski called John Middleton. He kind of knew that the Phillies had a good offer on the table, didn't think it was the best offer, but they really wanted the player. And John Middleton said, how good is this guy? Is he a difference maker? And Dave Dombrowski said he's one of the 10 best players in baseball. And the Phillies think that's what they're getting. They think they're getting the best shortstop in the game, guy who can, hit 300, bat at the top of the order, play a good shortstop. He's going to be 30, so, he still has years ahead of him at this level. They think they're getting one of the 10 best players in the game, a true difference maker, and a guy who's going to help put them over the top. So, it's certainly a lot of talk in Phillies camp about how do you replace Bryce Harper, who's going to miss the first few months of the season recovering from elbow surgery. Well, Trey Turner is a good way to start.
I know we're ping-ponging back and forth, but you keep just kind of piquing my interest with some of these tidbits from this conversation with Middleton. And, the idea of creating a legacy in baseball, I feel like to define a decade, you need multiple World Series wins. I mean, if you want to be in that upper echelon of people when they say, oh, the so-and-so Yankees and the so-and-so, you need to win. How much more difficult is it to put together a dynasty in today's game than it was, even just a couple decades ago?
I think it's really difficult. The fact that we really haven't had a dynasty since the late '90s Yankees, right? I mean, I guess the Giants won every even numbered year there for 3 years, but in those odd numbered years in the middle, they didn't make the playoffs. So not really a dynasty. I guess the closest thing we have to it, the Red Sox have won a bunch this century, but they've been spread out. So it's really difficult to do that. And I just think it speaks to how difficult it is to keep a team together, how difficult it is to keep a team at the top sharp and hungry and so yeah, I mean, like the two teams in Phillies history that are most beloved are the 1980 Phillies and the 2008 Phillies, and the Phillies in their history have been really good in pockets of time, late 70s, early 80s, late in the early 2000s, late in that decade. But John Middleton makes that point that, as great as those teams were and as beloved as they are, both of them, they only won one time. And so, he wants to win more than one time, which is why, he has Bryce Harper here through 2033, I believe, and Trey Turner through 2031. And, they're trying to lock up as many of their core players as they can because they want to try to keep it together and make several runs at this thing and try to win more than just one, or try to get there more than just one time.
When you assess the job that Bryce Harper and Machado have done so far through these long contracts that they signed, I know you just referenced Bryce's injury, and we'll kind of dig into that a little bit afterwards. But did the Phillies kind of get the better end of that deal when you consider that he's going to be around for, as you say, another good number of years here?
Yeah, I mean, so in that winter, that was the winter of 2018, 2019. It was Harper or Machado. That was all the conversation around the Philadelphia baseball scene that winter. And it went, if you remember, it went into spring training. They didn't sign. I think Machado signed in like the latter half of February, and Harper signed on March 1st or something like that. So it really went well into spring training. Are they going to get Harper or are they going to get Machado? And, I think one of the things that, if you're going to, it's worked out so far for both teams. Harper's been great for the Phillies. He's won an MVP. They've gone from being a team that was kind of, on the periphery of being a playoff team to a team that finally got over the hump last year and got to the World Series. Manny Machado's really put up great numbers for the Padres so far. I don't think either team can complain about the production that they've gotten, but I know the Phillies are happy that they have Bryce Harper under contract and don't have to think about an opt-out or anything like that. And Bryce didn't want one, he probably could have gotten an opt-out if he had wanted it. He didn't want it. He wanted to put down roots and be in Philadelphia. And, I think they're perfectly happy that he made that decision, that they don't have to go through this again. The way the Padres are now with Machado, like, is he going to stay? What's it going to cost to keep him? You have Steve Cohen lurking, like the Mets might need a third baseman, in a year or so. That's got to be kind of a major talking point in Padres camp. The Phillies don't have to worry about that. They've got Bryce Harper, who just turned 30 in October, with peak years left, under control. And John Middleton said kind of jokingly in October, the night that Harper hit that home run to put the Phillies in the World Series, he said, if a guy who makes, $25+ million a year can be underpaid, he's actually, I think Bryce is underpaid because, that there are some contracts that have been signed since then that have eclipsed what he signed for. And, the Phillies are perfectly happy to have him in the fold and to have him for many years to come.
The Mets are a good example, and even the Phillies to a certain extent, even though they just got right to the doorstep. I mean, you can spend and spend and spend in this sport, but it doesn't guarantee a World Series. So much can happen over the course of the season. I certainly don't need to tell you that. There are a lot of really good teams there, and there's a handful that are excellent. So how do you view strengths and weaknesses of the Phillies, as we kind of get back into spring training mode and start this season?
Well, I mean, you're right about injuries and look, stuff happens, right? So I think it's a lot of times it's the deepest teams that are the ones that can withstand a lot of that. And it's probably a question that the Phillies have here in spring training, but I think 29 other teams have the same question. Like, is our pitching deep enough? Is our lineup deep enough? How much adversity can we withstand? How many injuries can we withstand? Have we built ourselves enough insurance for a lot of that? And look, the Phillies are going to deal with it right off the bat. Like, as I said, Bryce Harper, not expected back from elbow surgery until probably close to the All-Star break. The Phillies are saying by the All-Star break, which I think is probably a little conservative. I could see maybe late June, early July, a couple of weeks before the break. So, but in any case, they're going to have to make do for a few months without him. And they think that they've built some depth. They think that they can cover for not having him for a while. Like I said, Trey Turner, adding him to the lineup helps. To have a star at the top of your lineup. They have Schwarber. They need more from Nick Castellanos than they got last year. They have Rhys Hoskins. They have JT Realmuto. So their lineup is still going to be good. To me, it all comes down to pitching. And, look, they're led by Zach Wheeler and Aaron Nola in their rotation. That's a good place to start. They have a fifth spot in their rotation that's open. Andrew Painter, who's 19 years old, and he's their top prospect, might very well win that job. But it also may come down to what they have behind him and how much luck they have on the injury front. So, they overcame a lot last year, and they had a really good second half and played their way into the playoffs. They're hoping that they'll get off to a better start this year and that they won't have to scramble as much late. But, they like the team that they've assembled. It's just going to, like I said, boil down to, what happens on the field and whether they're deep enough and strong enough organizationally to withstand the things that come up during the course of a long season.
Yeah, because you mentioned Schwarber and Painter, just to follow up on each of those guys, I mean, there's a lot of hype, I think, around Painter. What will you be looking for, and what have you seen already?
A lot of hype, you're right. And, he's 19, as I said. He turns 20 on April 10th, I believe. And so if he breaks camp with the Phillies, he would be the first, and makes a start before April 10th. He would be the first 19-year-old pitcher to start a game for the Phillies since 1980. And I'm not sure, but I think he might be the first 19-year-old to break camp with them since 1973. So this does not happen every day. It is quite a phenomenon to have someone who's this young have a real chance to make the team. And so every time he touches the ball, whether it's in a bullpen or a live batting practice, and certainly once the game starts, it's going to make news around here because everyone's really excited to see the, whether the hype matches the, what happens out on the field in spring training. So that's going to be a huge storyline throughout. And then if he does make the team or, whenever he does get called up, then the question is going to become, how do you manage his innings so that you get him from start to finish? He pitched 100 innings in the minor leagues last year. What's a safe and comfortable increase? Can he pitch 130 this year? Can he go more than that? So all of these are going to be questions that surround him. Both will he make the team and then how do they get him through? So that to me is certainly the storyline for the Phillies throughout camp, and I'm anxious to see it unfold.
And with Schwarber, how high should expectations be for him coming off the season that he had?
Yeah, I mean, pretty high, right? Like, he led the National League in home runs, and you'd like the odds that, he's going to hit a bunch of home runs again. I think the shift or the lack of shift will help him. I talked to him about it the other day, and he said, how can you be a left-handed pull hitter and not love the fact that they can't put a guy in shallow right field, at least another infielder in shallow right field? He's curious to see what teams do to kind of scheme for, will they move their left fielder over? All of those things. So I like the fact that he's not going to have to deal with the standard shift that he's had to deal with before. But yeah, I mean, look, he's a power hitter, and then probably going to be. He let off a lot last year. He's probably going to start the year in more of a run producing spot for them, even if it's batting just behind Trey Turner, batting second. So they're looking for him to drive in a lot of runs, hit a lot of home runs, and his track record through the years is that he's been able to do that. So it's probably a good bet that he'll do that again.
So the Phillies have a star at the top of the batting order, and they've got some power in the lineup. You mentioned pitching and just the potential for injury over such a long season. As you look across the league, is that really where World Series are still won and lost? Has there been any kind of deviation there, or does it usually come down to how strong is your rotation, how healthy is your rotation when the games start to really count?
Yeah, I just think it comes down to depth, and it also comes down to timing. So to go back to this conversation that I was having the other day with the Phillies owner, John Middleton, I made some kind of a comment about, sort of off the cuff, about, that they got hot at the right time last year. And he pushed back against that. He said, no, I don't think we got hot at the right time. I think we got healthy at the right time. And it's a fair pushback because they did. They played well from June on. Once they made a change, they were 22 and 29. They changed the manager. They brought in Rob Thompson, and then they were, neck and neck with the Mets from June 1st on. I think there was a game that separated them from the Mets in the standings over the final 4 months of the season. So he's right. It wasn't that they suddenly got hot, but Bryce Harper came back at the end of August. Gene Segura got healthy and came back in August. Zach Wheeler, who'd been on the injured list, came back in September and was able to make 3 or 4 starts before the postseason. Nick Castellanos, who missed time in September, was back the final week of the season. So they kind of got the cavalry back just in time for October and were able to make a run. And so I think it's the depth of your organization that can help you through injuries. Like Bryce Harper goes down with a broken thumb at the end of June. They call up Derek Hall from AAA. He hits 9 home runs and like 130 at-bats. And you don't really have, it's not to say you didn't miss Bryce Harper, but it certainly helps that you had somebody who you plugged into that spot in the lineup who was a productive player. So depth helps you get through it, but you also need a little luck in terms of timing. You need to get healthy at the right time, peak at the right time, and then off you go in October and you have a chance to make a run to the World Series. And I think that's probably what last year proved as much as anything for the Phillies is that, you've got to be playing well, but you've also got to have all your ducks lined up. And if you can get that, if Zach Wheeler gets hurt, 2 weeks later, then he's not ready for the postseason, and then it might look a whole lot different. So that's where luck comes into play a little bit as well.
And just a couple more for you, Scott, and then I'll let you go because I know you probably have a pretty busy day out there. You alluded to some of the rule changes. We're going to see some different things here in this next year. You got bases the size of pizza boxes. You got a pitch clock. You got all kinds of stuff. Sure. Which rule change do you think will have the greatest impact?
So initially, I think in spring training, we're going to hear a lot about the pitch clock and the pitch timer. I know with the Phillies, everywhere their pitchers have gone here so far in spring training, it seems that there is a pitch timer waiting for them. Whether they are in the bullpen, whether they are on a mound throwing live batting practice, there is a pitch timer somewhere. And the goal is not, I don't think, to kind of like get them to adapt at the snap of a finger. It's just to kind of like to be there as part of the background so that they kind of get a sense of timing and tempo and rhythm. Because if you've been around a while and you've played this game for a while, you're not accustomed to it. You're not accustomed to having this clock on you at all times. And so I think it's trying to break some habits. It's trying to create some new habits, trying to speed some guys up who are notoriously slow. And that's going to take time. I think the first few weeks of spring training are going to look a little messy. I think you're going to have a lot of pitchers who get called for violations because they're, a tick too slow or whatever. And a lot of automatic balls, automatic strikes. Don't forget it's the hitters too, right? They can't walk around the batter's box anymore or adjust their gloves. They got to be ready to go. So I think the first few weeks of spring training, it's going to be a little bit ugly and a little bit messy, and players are going to do a lot of complaining. But ultimately, I think they'll get used to it. I think they'll adapt. And I hope, by the start of the season, a lot of that messiness is cleaned up. I think the shift ultimately is going to have a big influence on the game longer term because teams are going to have to figure out new ways to defend against or to optimize for how to defend against a certain type of hitter. And I'm sure there are going to be teams that try things. Maybe they move the left fielder over to right field and leave left field wide open. And then somebody will hit one into an open left field and run forever, and that team will have to adjust back. So I think that, to me, is one that's going to have a longer-term impact on adding more action to the game and action on the bases and whatnot than the pitch timer. The pickoff thing is interesting to me. Pitchers are going to be limited in how often they can throw over, which might lead players to run a little bit more. Trey Turner was saying the other day, yeah, I might have to run a little bit more. Certainly the expectation is going to be that I run more or try to steal more bases. So we'll see if attempts go up, and that's where it's going to help to have a catcher who can throw runners out. So, all of this is designed to get action in the game, which is a great thing. It's a much needed thing. And, I think there's going to be a lot of complaints early about the pitch clock, but ultimately it's going to be these other things that have a greater impact on the game and how it's played.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Do the Phillies have a definitive closer, Scott? I know there's a couple of guys that are in the mix. I mean, who's their closer this year?
They don't have one. Rob Thompson, the manager here, really likes to run his bullpen based on, matchups and situations. And more than anything, he likes to have options so that you don't get into a bind where, oh my gosh, I've used my closer 2 days in a row and I don't want to use him a third day. And what am I going to do now? So he likes to have multiple options he can go to out there. If he wants a lefty for a particular pocket of the order, he has Jose Alvarado and Gregory Soto, who came over from the Tigers in a trade. If he wants a righty for a pocket of the order in the ninth inning, he has Craig Kimbrell and he has Sir Anthony Dominguez. That's how they're going to start. And if I had to bet, I would say that's how it's going to stay. However, Kimbrell makes things very interesting because not only is he the active saves leader in baseball, but he's also kind of what I call a natural born closer. He's never really done anything in his career other than close. And the one time he did, it was in Chicago with the White Sox at the end of 2021, I want to say, and it didn't go so well. So I could see where if Kimbrell dominates early, they let him sort of settle into the ninth inning a little bit as more of a traditional closer. That would be the one thing that I could see that would sort of compel Rob Thompson to maybe get away from closer by matchups. But they really do like to match up in the ninth inning and even in the seventh and eighth. And I think that's, that worked well for them last year, and that's their intention to stick with it.
I'd just be curious to hear kind of what the energy is around the Philly spring training, and also what, I know we talked a little bit about the rotation, but kind of what the looming question mark is for you about this roster heading into the year.
Yeah, the energy is, I'll say it's different than what I'm used to. So I have the unique experience of having covered the Phillies in 2007, 8, and 9 when they were really good and going to the World Series in the Chase Utley, Ryan Howard days. And then I was away for a while covering the Red Sox and moved back here in 2018. And it was a much different energy and a much different vibe around the Phillies, who hadn't made the playoffs in so long. And that playoff drought grew to 10 years last year, and before they finally broke it. And I've talked to a lot of players here so far who've said, you always had that playoff drought hanging over you in the past few years. Ever since Bryce Harper's been here in 2019, it's been Harper and Real Muto and Hoskins and Nola and Wheeler. They've had a lot of talent, but they just had never gotten there before. And so this cloud kind of followed them. Everywhere they went, people wanted to talk about the drought. Well, the drought's over. They made the playoffs last year. They got to the World Series. And I think the energy here is a lot more, I guess confident is a good way to put it. Just a lot more hey, we don't have to deal with that anymore. The monkey's off our back. We've sort of arrived as a legitimate World Series contender, and we believe we can get back there because now we've done it before. And while it wasn't, I would say it wasn't nobody went around talking about doubting whether they could do it in years past. I mean, I think there's just this feeling that they know they can now. So they know what it took, and they're ready to try to do it again, and they're expected to do it again. So the expectations are higher here as well. So it's definitely a different energy. It's also different energy to have, basically 23 or 24 of your 26 roster spots already claimed, so there's not a ton of beyond the fifth starter with Andrew Painter. There's not a ton of competition for jobs. It's more of a get healthy or stay healthy and get out of here all intact kind of camp. And I think if, probably you talk to me in like another week or two and they'll have like 3 or 4 more weeks left to go here, I'd tell you that they're ready to go and ready to wrap it up and get started now. So it's very much a kind of turnkey group, and they're ready to go and hoping that they can duplicate what they did last year.
Scott, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of spring training. It sounds like a lot of the questions have already been answered, so it might just be a waiting game at this point until the season begins in a couple of weeks. Appreciate it.
Sure, anytime.